Dunning-Kruger is a fantastic and fascinating psychological concept wherein people often think that they know more than maybe they actually do, which very much conflicts with some of Dave's previous statements. But it is in that we become very confident in the facts that we think we know. And when confronted with opposing information, a lot of times our brains, without us even knowing about it, are going to double down on what we already know and reject that new information as false, even if it's real. So the Dunning-Kruger effect can be something that we really need to look out for when doing risk analyses and in talking with our SMEs. Because SMEs are smart, but they've never been very introspective probably about what they know and why they know it. So metacognition, that's a nice $10 word, about thinking about thoughts. So getting your SMEs to think about their knowledge, why they know it, and challenging them through questioning, not through arguments or direct confrontation, but just questioning their knowledge, questioning what they tell you, can really lead you to a sort of informational Buddhism in having that introspective data analysis that becomes very defensible because you're asking them to defend, you're asking a SME who is a subject matter expert to defend their expertise and provide reasoning for the numbers that they're giving.
And so the last thing to talk about with data gathering is knowing when enough is enough. I hinted at that a little bit ago, but make sure you don't get bogged down in the data gathering thinking you have to gather more and more and more, because there's a point when more really is less. And this is triage, remember, this is rapid response. And so you don't want to spend weeks doing that. You do want this to be a responsive and relatively short process. Risk isn't managed in a vacuum. Certainly not in my vacuum.
So when we're talking to business people, especially when they're not at all familiar with IT or risk management, we really need to bring things down to their level. Yes, everybody who's watching this is likely very smart, and I know we all like showing that off through using big words, but these people need to, it needs to be a relatable conversation between peers. Bringing that down to their level and helping them understand what you're asking of them is going to make every interaction a whole lot easier than if you're spitting questions at them and using highly technical language. You want them to feel comfortable with you. You don't want them to feel like they're under a microscope or going through an audit.
And when we start to talk to the business, this becomes even more critical, because in my experience, I found when I started talking to the business, I wasn't talking the same language at all, sometimes using the same words, or I was using words that they didn't really get the definition for. So for example, in a business value mapping, I said, well, tell me your top 5 business processes by revenue. And I got some blank stares. And I had to rephrase it to say, what is the work every day that people do that make your department work? And can we group those tasks together? And once I started talking about it like that, they really understood it. And so you have to establish a rapport. Some part of this isn't, like Alyssa said, it's not an audit. We're gathering information to help the business make decisions. And in doing that, we have to talk to them in their terms. And so this is a great upside for doing this, is you do establish rapport with key people within the business, and it does open some doors for you, even if your meeting's on Zoom. So calibrate this. So like we said, you already have enough data. It needs to be unlocked. You have to go find it. And so chances are everything you need already exists in the company. You just need to go and find it. So what are some things to look for, Alyssa? What are we looking for? What are some problems with this?
No problems with it. I mean, absolutely, there is a lot of data out there that can be pre-consumed, but ultimately you're going to have to talk to people. And when you talk to business people, when you talk to people in IT, you're going to want to strive for calibrated estimates, which is that starting at ridiculous ranges, both on the low end and the high end, and slowly narrowing your ranges until you get to a point that you're about 90% confident. Um, One thing that you need to be careful of, especially when you're talking with technical people, can be anchoring, and that is where they'll throw out a most likely number. Let's say a data breach happens once every 3 years. On average, the lowest we'll ever see it is once a year, or the lowest we'll ever see it is once every 6 years, and the highest we'll ever see it is 3 times every 3 years. It's just an average of ultimately your most likely number, and you don't want to let them do that. So the easiest way that I found to really drive those discussions is to start with low ranges, and maybe even set a range around your lowest number and your highest number, and then start narrowing those ranges down, and then start narrowing down into the most likely range. Um, Something else, though, to keep in mind is uh, diminishing returns, and that is the entire point of accuracy versus precision. This does not need to be 100% correct. It's a defensible process that gets you to a range, and triage is there to help you get to that range very quickly. Um, a lot of the prep work that goes into that definitely helps with driving that triage value and getting those triage analyses done very quickly.
And it can be difficult, to get your subject matter experts or the people you're talking to into that established range with some confidence. We need this to be calibrated. So there's some techniques, and these are well-known techniques, and gamification is one of the best. This could be pretty simple. You could just have 10 cards, 9 of one color, 1 of another color, shuffle them, or use a bag with 10 marbles, and 9 of which are the same color, 1 of which isn't. And you can see that there's a 90%, 10% ratio there. And we want to reach that calibrated estimate. And it's been proven that if you put this exercise to them in terms of money, to say, all right, if you could pick between sticking with your estimate or picking a marble out of this bag, which one are you going to pick? And at the point where they're going to stick with their estimate based on the probabilities of the objects in your bag or your cards or whatever you're using to gamify it, you've reached a pretty high fidelity in the calibration of those estimates.
One other thing to consider, and this is less in talking to SMEs, but something to have in mind while you are talking to SMEs, is knowing your controls landscape and your resistance strength. If you're talking to an application SME or networking SME, they're going to understand the controls around those specific things. But you're measuring vulnerability on a larger scale than that. So make sure that you understand the enterprise control landscape and what maybe is upstream or downstream from the specific scenario that you're looking at.
Yeah, and we've found, in the past that, initially having a workshop, for example, with SMEs from multiple areas where you're kind of simulating it, walking through it, and then you find out somebody knows about controls that somebody else doesn't know about. So it's a great way to kind of get those estimates and arrive at calibrated estimates. All right, nice assets. It'd be a shame if something bad happened to them. So building an asset library, and this is another key to the rapid triage process and also making it effective. And the really good news is that in version 3, Risklens added some great capabilities for doing that.
You can create assets as reusable components where their vulnerability and resistance strength They're already pre-calculated for you. Well, you calculate them in the asset, and then anytime you use the asset in a scenario, all of that information is already brought over. So if you're running triage and you pull an asset that you already have built out, that's going to give you a really accurate assessment in a really short amount of time. Doing that across multiple assets is going to get you, that sort of long range risk register view of, we have these assets, these are the risks, this is maybe the riskiest asset.
And some people then are going to say, well, that means we have to spend a whole bunch of time creating the assets, an asset library. And if you've ever worked on a CMDB project, that can be a road, the bridge to nowhere sometimes. But in version 3 of Risk Lens, we can now create assets when we need them. So you're not limited by needing to go out and find, classify, document tons of those assets. You can now create them during your risk scenarios. And that's an awesome new feature.
Yeah, essentially, Triage is going to populate risk statements in your risk register and allow you to sort through those dynamically by risk type or by threat type or by asset or by range. So you've got, in a way, a multi-dimensional view of your risk that can be dynamically sorted to target whatever population or whatever specific scenario or use case that you are currently engaged in. And it removes the guesswork from flagging your top risks.
And now you're going to have business relevant risks for your business stakeholders. And one of the things that will happen is you're going to uncover outliers. You're going to find some risks that are just almost breathtaking. It's like driving up to the Grand Canyon. You don't want to get too close to the edge because you might fall in. And those scenarios are really interesting, but the problem can be that they cause concern among the executives. They may question your analysis, for example. And it's really critical to point out that risk analysis is an iterative process. You do need to go back and make sure that the results you have are actually reasonable. It's pretty easy to make a mistake or misestimate. And the good news is it's pretty simple to go out and find them. But keep in mind that this is an iterative process. It's not a one-time event.
And if you do have an outlier, if your executives take issue with or anyone who takes issue with the potential range that's being shown, it's very easy in Risk Lens to walk them through exactly what the workshop was and make changes where you need to. And you have that sort of history view as well now in version 3 that you can see how that risk changes depending on what your inputs are.
Yeah, I remember years ago, I created a qualitative risk analysis, and somebody actually asked, well, why is this up here and why is it red? I said, well, because that's where I put it. And guess what? That's not really the right answer.
This will make sure you never have to just say, well, that's where I put it.
I threw a dart. Is that okay? It's a probabilistic model. So let's come down to outcomes, because at the beginning we talked about needing outcomes, and you'll see in the graphic, and Alyssa's going to talk about this a little bit, but you can absolutely perform quantitative analysis using spreadsheets. You can do it. But what's going to be missing is the ability to reuse data. We talked about, the assets and data helpers, and the ability to create an iterative process in which each iteration actually builds the speed at which you're going to be able to approach your next risk scenario. So another problem with the spreadsheet method is it just doesn't scale well for large and distributed teams. And right now, as we speak, of course, there's a lot of people working from home. And so almost all teams are distributed in some way. And what I really like is that Risk Lens has some great tools in the form of those assets and data helpers.
Yeah, this really makes it a very quick and easy process. A lot of people will say that quantitative analysis can't work because it takes too much time. That you can't ever deliver business relevant results in the time that they are still relevant. But using these reusable data points and relying on a lot of that pre-planning with your assets, with your loss tables, um, with your business executives, with your SMEs, your technical SMEs, they're going to give you these data points that allow you to run quick scenarios in triage that will provide a lot of accuracy. And then you can definitely do a deep dive into any of these scenarios that you triage. It makes it easier for you to decide where those deep dives need to be done so that executive leadership isn't just swerving towards risk acceptance rather than risk mitigation, because you can plan for this and show the business value in mitigating these risks.
And when you're building this analysis, now you're expressing risk in dollars and you're giving the business information to make decisions that aren't just a jerk of the wheel, right? We're not just going to yank the wheel to go to risk acceptance and move on. And your risk triage and quantitative analysis are going to help your business people make quick decisions that drive down risk. And this can and should contribute to your top line operations. Now, one of the common arguments against quantitative analysis is that it isn't responsive. And what we outlined here are ways to make it responsive by engaging with the business, by building those asset libraries, by building the muscle memory in your department and throughout the organization. And the triage process is the biggest step in demonstrating both the value and the relevance of risk. So I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Alyssa, I really appreciate you taking part. And so I really appreciate, Risk Lens having us here and the FAIR Institute. So I want to make sure to invite everybody to ask questions and we'll be here for a little bit to make sure we answer them.